Hello, welcome to the Grid Snaps podcast. Rob Howard here, just myself. I don't usually like doing these things by myself, but as it is, I am moving the studio again. I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but the studio is moving, I think, for the second straight year, basically. I moved late July last year. I'm going to be moving early July this time. Fortunately, though, it is a local move, not a cross-country move, so I anticipate less interruption. But I did want to get some content out before that move really got going, because you never know when you're going to decide to pack up your computer and pack up your stuff and all that. So in this brief episode, and this is something, by the way, I've wanted to do for a while. I wanted to get a little bit better, and it's one of the reasons why I've switched the format of the podcast to, instead of very highly edited, produced podcasts, the more, hey, this is more like a live YouTube video that then I spin off into the pod catching stuff. I do an audio only dump of it and all that. And one of the reasons why is in order to get content out more quickly, so that there isn't these big gaps and all that. And the editing, when you kind of try to do the podcast real tightly professionally, is as nice as that is, and putting in with the music and the kind of pre-recorded bits and everything, it does very much create more time. That editing just piles up on itself. So it's great to be able to share unique content here. So let's talk about Yakuza Judgment. So this is a game I've been playing for a while now. I'm actually about 40 hours into it. I wanted to get completely done with it before I talked about it, but I didn't quite make it. I'm on the final chapter. I'm right near the end of the game, so I should complete it in the next couple of days, unless moving gets in the way of that. So let me just go ahead and, for those that are on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and fire up some game footage of Yakuza Judgment. So for those that are just listening to the audio, please excuse my clicking and tapping on the keyboard as I find a Yakuza Judgment Let's Play. And I am going to, there's going to be things that I get better at in terms of this new style of YouTube video. Preparing these background videos beforehand will be one of those things I get better at. But right now, again, I'm in
it's cool.
I'm in the midst of moving and all that. So really, there's just no way I'm going to get better at it in the short term. All right, so let me go ahead and get that footage up there once I get it on the right screen here. Okay, there we go. All right, so there's just footage from the game. If you're on YouTube, you can kind of see it. I'm not going to do anything that's going to be too spoilery. This is just literally the first part of the game. So if that, you can just listen if that's going to bother you. In fact, I'll probably just zoom in and out here, try to get some actual gameplay bits, not the cinematics, as I talk about it. So what is Yakuza Judgment? If you don't know, it's part of the long-running Yakuza series from Sega that goes all the way back, I believe, to 2007. And I've done an entire podcast on it, so I'm not going to rehash everything. So if you're curious in terms of a deep dive about the Yakuza games, please check out that podcast. I did it with Patrick. It's very in-depth. I even recorded kind of a special kind of historical bit about the real Yakuza at the beginning. It's actually one of our most popular episodes, so definitely check that out. So Judgment is a game in the series, and the thing about that series is that people think of it as the sort of Japanese equivalent to Grand Theft Auto. I think that's really kind of short-sighted, and it's really unique unto itself. and one of the reasons why is it has a really small open world. It's really just one district of a city here, and you don't actually need a car. There are taxis, but it's not nearly as huge or as expansive as a GTA game or an Elder Scrolls game or some other open world game that's really large. It's really just one city district named Kamurocho, and you sometimes visit different locations, but it's all on foot, and so there's this really tight, intimate experience that I think is really great. But these games are beat-em-ups, which is not going to be the case, by the way, with Yakuza 7 that's coming out in the United States, I think in a year or so, maybe a little less than that, I'm not sure, but it is coming out, and that will actually have turn-based RPG combat, which I think is a good thing, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But this game Yakuza Judgment is a brawler, just like all the other games in the series, and there's Yakuza's 1 through 6. There's Yakuza Ishin, which is the historical one that takes place in the Meiji Restoration era of Japan. It's supposed to be like the ancestors of some of the main characters, basically. And there's Yakuza Dead Souls, the zombie spin-off game. So there's lots of games of the series, and Judgment is one of the spin-off games. It's not a numbered game. And you play as Yagami, also known as Tak, or Takumi. You hear people refer to him as Tak, but Yagami is his name, and he runs a detective agency, the Yagami Detective Agency. So he's a private eye, not a gangster. So that's kind of the first big difference. He is not a gangster, although, as you might guess, because it is a Yakuza game, he is kind of intimately connected with that world in ways that I'll allow you to experience yourself in the story. And he's investigating a crime. Actually, he investigates a lot of different things throughout the game, but there's one overarching case that he investigates throughout the... Well, for me, it's probably going to end up being about 45 hours, I guess. A maximum of 45 hours. I've done a lot of side stuff, so I imagine you can complete the game, a lot faster. And so, the usual loop of a Yakuza game is basically, okay, you run around the city, engage in side quests as you see fit, and you play mini games. You might go to an arcade, or you might play darts, batting cages, whatever. Sometimes side quests tie into those things. Sometimes you just do them for whatever. There's usually some illicit casinos in town, because that's actually not legal as such in Japan. So these are underground things that you'll find where you can play like blackjack and such. And that's the basic loop. Isn't really a whole lot different in this spin-off, except everything's been given a detective sheen, as I lose my ability to talk just for a second. Everything's been given a detective gloss, or a detective coating, if you will. They did not just throw out everything from the previous games and rebuild it from the ground up as a detective game, which I think at times hurts it, but it also makes sense because as a spin-off game, they're probably not expecting as many sales, so they just simply couldn't do that. So at this point, let's talk about how Yakuza Judgment attempts to be a detective private eye game, and how successful those game design changes and additions are. So one of the things that's always really challenging whenever you want to do detective gameplay, and this has been tried again and again in retail commercial games, it's a really hard nut to crack, but it's a fun nut to crack, and so it's been attempted quite a bit, and that is, how do you sell the experience of being a detective? Because a lot of what being a detective is in real life, it's exciting in movies. It's exciting and fun in movies and TV shows and books. But of course, in real life, it's, when you talk to detectives, or you listen to interviews of real police detectives, and a lot of it's dull, boring paperwork and legwork and stuff. It's not actually that exciting. What drives people in detective fiction is that brilliant logical deduction in the mind of the detective. And how do you make that a compelling gameplay element. You have a controller of buttons and so on. So that's always a really challenging thing. In LA Noire, they did it via advanced facial expressions. So they use special technology so that you can observe characters lying and try to judge that based on their facial tics and expressions, and so they tried to generate gameplay out of that. And I think there was some success there. I think that was a good game. It had other issues, but I think it was a reasonable, good try. Other games attempt to abstract it in various different ways. Obviously, some games really don't try to simulate the detective experience very much, even though they are a game where you play a detective. The Batman games are probably some of the biggest offenders of this, where you're playing as the world's greatest detective, but you're basically just beating guys up all the time, right? And that's really a danger here in Yakuza Judgment, is, are you really just beating up guys all the time? Because you are, of course, because this is an engine built on melee fighting. Your character is a great martial artist and does come into contact with a lot of thugs, and there's a lot of fighting. My judgment is judgment, so to speak, yes and no. So basically, how they attempt to integrate the detective experience in the game is by integrating a few new mechanics into the game. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the game footage now. So the first thing they do is, the first thing I remember in the game anyway, is the drone piloting, which is really cool. I think that was a success. So basically you have a drone that you can control with a smartphone app that you have, and that drone allows you to spy on people. It allows you to conduct surveillance. And there's actually a fairly fun racing side quest series that you can undertake, where you use your drone and race it against other drones, and you can upgrade the equipment and level it up and everything. So I think the drone racing is pretty successful. I think it works pretty well. Another thing I think that works well, although it can get tedious, so they have to be careful of how they pace it, is the tailing people. So oftentimes you are asked to tail a suspect, to follow them, and if you get too close, they'll notice you. It fills up a meter, and if that meter fills up, you fail that, and you actually do get a game over, like you failed in combat. I think that's reasonably successful. It can feel a little tedious, and not everyone's going to like that. Not everyone's going to like that style of gameplay. I actually do like it and do generally enjoy it. Not everyone will, but they do a pretty good job of pacing. The chases or the tailing sequences never last too long, because basically it's like a rubber band effect. You get close, they're going to turn around and see you, the meter fills, you back up, the meter starts to go back down. And of course there's gameisms that we have to accept, right? In real life, if someone was following you and you saw them, there wouldn't be some meter in your head that fills up and then you only worried about it if the meter got all the way. You would instantly know, you would instantly realize someone's following you, right? If you turned around and you saw someone looking directly at you and creeping behind garbage cans and cars, that, because that's one of the gameisms that you just have to accept to make this a compelling game system, is that they can be looking dead on at you, but as soon as you hide, they're like, oh, I guess it's fine. And to me, that's an okay gameism. You're going to have that with these sorts of abstracted things. And I think it works okay. I don't think it's quite as successful as the drone piloting in terms of being like, oh, this is a cool way to convey his detective work that's kind of action-oriented, but it's fine. There's some other things that I think are... lots of other games do them. I think they are okay in the sense that they fill the role they have to fill, but they're not particularly compelling. Like, whenever Yagami questions somebody, you basically have to use your own deductive reasoning as the player, which I'm fine with that. I think that's good. But you're often presented with like 3 choices, and it's a funny game they play. See, in Phoenix Wright, a game like that, which is entirely built around detective work. I mean, you're a lawyer, but it's detective work. Here it's okay because, you answer wrong, your sort of life bar goes down, or you lose one of those medals on the screen or whatever. And then if you fail too many times, you lose the game. And so there is a sense of consequence. You're going to look at the evidence, you're going to review it really carefully, you're going to think real hard about it. And if they've done a good job constructing the logic of the case and the witness and the motivations and motives and everything, you can more often than not figure out, if you think real hard and thoroughly, what the right answer should be from the finite set of evidence that you have. Obviously, this being a brawler that they've painted this detective veneer on, they just don't have the systems to go quite that in depth with that portion of it. So when you're questioning a witness, you're given 3 choices or so, and if you're never going to fail these. That's the thing. You're never going to fail them. If you pick the wrong one, there'll be some canned response that just takes you back to the choices again. Like if the idea, if you answer, well, you went to the convenience store, and it's just like obvious that the person you're questioning didn't go to the convenience store, what'll happen is Yagami will say something apologetic. Oh, well, I guess I need to, I didn't really mean that. I'm going to question you again. And everyone just kind of like, okay, he's going to question him again, right? And so you can be wrong all day long when you question people in this game, and it won't actually have a negative consequence. Now, if you answer correctly, you do get experience points that can be used to upgrade your character. So you do have a small incentive to get it right, but you don't really, there's not a negative disincentive for getting it wrong. And so these portions of the game feel very perfunctory. They feel almost unnecessary, really. It's like kind of the bare minimum they had to do to get that feel they wanted, but it's not really compelling gameplay. Like Phoenix Wright, I would say, even though it's very simple, it is compelling because that's how you lose the game. You lose the game by getting these things wrong. So it's really testing you out. Like, how well can you think through this when you're questioning someone? This is the correct response. And it's hard. It's hard because, sometimes in a Phoenix Wright game, it's really obtuse, and then you get mad at the designers and localizers for making it obtuse. Like, hey, there was no way I was going to be able to figure that out without either guessing right or looking it up on the internet. But when it's done well, you feel great because you're like, hey, I looked at the evidence, I looked at the testimony, I actually used my own noggin and figured it out. And that feels amazing. And I think the systems in Yakuza Judgment aren't quite developed enough to give you that feeling. I mean, it sometimes happens, but since you know that there isn't really a fail state associated with getting that sort of thing wrong, it doesn't really deliver the goods in that way. So again, I think the action, this is no surprise, the action-oriented sequences work great. The sort of deductive reasoning sequences needed more, or gameplay systems, I should say, really need more content or more depth, I should say. They really need more depth to sell me on it. They really just do feel like they're just kind of, they feel like a veneer, like a window dressing veneer, right? So I think a more successful version of this game would have had really a Phoenix Wright style setup for the questioning. In a similar sense, they don't do this a lot, but they do have kind of hunt the pixel sort of things where you're made to look in a room to find something. And again, there may have been some time sequences that I'm not remembering, but usually these are also fairly consequence-free, and it's just a matter of finding the thing. And again, it's not especially compelling. They do a better job when you're looking for an individual person. There is kind of an interesting setup where you're given a bunch of details, like, hey, this person is wearing a black shirt, they have glasses, they're short, okay, and they have brown shoes, right? And it gives you a list of checkboxes, and you go and you try to find that person in a crowd. And if you focus on a person that might have white shoes but is short with glasses and a black shirt, you'll get check. Oh, nope, doesn't have brown shoes, and that's not the right person. You keep looking until you find someone that matches the description. I thought that was kind of a cool way to abstract, like, finding somebody. I don't necessarily remember too many scenarios where that was done integrated in a compelling way, though, where there was, again, these sequences seem to lack consequence. Like there was one time where I was looking at a pretty large area and there were kind of crowds of people congregating, and there seemed to be a time sensitive nature. Like the person I was trying to find was supposed to be walking through the building going outside. So I guess in that case, there may have been a chance that I may have failed that by focusing on the wrong people. And not kind of being eagle-eyed about it, not kind of thinking about where would this person logically be coming from. But I feel like that system, more than the other systems, has potential without tremendous amounts of production rework. And because I know probably the big struggle for Sega was, we want to make this a detective story, but we cannot rebuild the Dragon engine, the software they use to build the game. Basically, they can't. And that's what they use. It's their own internal tech. They can't just remake their tech to do a whole bunch of things that it hadn't done before, right? They have to sort of smartly pick new systems to add. And I think the trying to locate people in a crowd might have been a smart thing they could have done. They could have expanded on that system without adding a bunch of production time. Just by making scenarios where there were consequences. Now, the tailing, which is one of the successful mechanics, I think there I did fail a couple times by someone, because what ends up happening is, if you get close to them, they're more likely to fill up the meter, and I did fail that way, where the meter gets filled up, and that means they notice you, and then that's it, right? Because they're not supposed to notice you. But I also failed the other way, where I kept myself too far, and then what ends up happening is a timer starts ticking down if you can't see them, if you don't have a line of sight to them. And then all of a sudden you lose them. And even though they actually do give you a little arrow to point you in the right way, if they're in complicated geometry, you could lose them and then have failed that way. So the fact that there is a fail state, that a average ability, and I always consider myself very average when it comes to player skill, that you can fail, again, it makes those sequences feel more compelling because you actually have the potential to not execute them correctly. So again, I think their detective mechanics are a mixed bag. So how would I rate this in terms of Yakuza games? I would say like all Yakuza games, the sum is greater than the parts here, because there are some issues here. I feel like melee combat, because this game is so focused on the detective thing, it does some things that are successful, some things I think aren't so, but it's really trying hard to be like, you're not a gangster, you're a detective. I feel like the melee combat feels weird here, unlike in the other games. There's definitely times where Yagami is presented with a scenario, and instead of being clever, he just says, I'm just going to beat everyone up. That's not what a great detective does, right? Like, obviously a detective can get into combat situations in a game, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's definitely scenarios where you're just in a room full of bad guys, and he's just like, I'm just going to smoke them all. And that kind of superhero fighting ability makes sense when the character is Kazuma from the mainline games, because that's kind of his thing. He's like a Fist of the North Star style, super strong hero character. But this is not Tak Yagami. This is he's a detective. Yes, he's a good fighter, but he's a wiry, skinny guy. I just don't expect him to have the same tremendous fighting ability. That's sort of Kazuma's superpower here. I feel like they should have made Yagami's superpower, his ability to use his mind to get through, to get through situations. Still have fighting, because I understand that's the systems that you have, but there were just too many times in this game where I was just like, I don't really want to fight. I want to do cool detective things. There are systems that I haven't even brought up yet that they just don't use enough, I think. They have some really interesting lock-picking things. They're very easy. They're not actually very hard to do, but they feel good anyway. Because sometimes with a game system, it's what makes them fun isn't always like whether they're hard and it's overcoming a challenge. Sometimes just the tactile feel, like the lock-picking feels good to do. It feels actually pretty satisfying. They don't do enough of that. There's several different types of lock-picking. That kind of stuff is awesome. I want to do more of that. and less of I want to sneak more. I want to fight less. And so in that instance, the game can feel weird. But when I say the sum is greater than the whole of its parts, Kamurocho feels amazing as ever, right? Which is a district in Tokyo. It's based on Kabuchiko, the real life location, and or I can never say that right. Kabukicho, I think is what it is. Yes, and yeah, it feels great to be in. Feels great to go to those restaurants and eat that amazing virtual food. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it does feel good as virtual tourism. The side missions are often hilarious, like always, and the story is for the most part good. So before this gets too long, as I didn't want this episode to be too long, let me mention the story, and let me mention one really cool, unique thing that I think really makes this game above average for me. Right now, if you're listening to me, he thinks this is like a 7 out of 10 to use bloated game media review scores, right? But it sounds average. I think it is a little bit better than an average game, mainly because of the story being compelling. It's not perfect, but it is compelling, and how they structure side missions. So let's talk about the story first. So Yakuza games can have very difficult stories because it's all about double crossing, and it's all about characters radically changing their motivations and revealing that they're totally different than you thought, and there's a lot of kind of skullduggery in Yakuza stories, so they can get really complex. The best stories in the series always focus on one strong kind of pillar in the plot. So even as things are getting complicated and there's double and triple crossing and all that, you can still focus on the one main thing. Like Yakuza 0, the prequel game, which is maybe the best of all of them, does this really well because the whole plot is on this empty lot in Kamurocho that's really valuable, and everyone's trying to get it. And no matter how complicated that gets, the story is about the empty lot, right? So in a similar way here, there's this one is all about a drug. And I actually love what they do here. I love how they make the story this super topical, interesting thing. This does not come up in game stories very much, these sorts of issues. So Japan has an aging population. So it's an aging population, and it's a low fertility rate, which means there are lots of older people and less young people to help take care of them. And so this is a big problem. And then when you add the prevalence of dementia, particularly Alzheimer's, then the need for really good treatments for obviously really horrible disease is obvious. So the story takes place around a drug called AD9 that is a Alzheimer's treatment that works extremely well in rats but has not been proven in humans. The story focuses like a laser on that, and that kind of pillar really gives a strong central core. So as you're trying to keep up with all the moving parts, you just know this is about 89. Now, it doesn't begin about 89. It begins, in a smaller, more thing. It begins with Yagami helping to defend someone, and it kind of blossoms from there. But really, once you get through the first third of the game, the drug 89 is the core component. And I really like that. I really liked how there's kind of the game kind of everything is connected in a really satisfying way. So things, again, this is a spoiler-free thing, so things that you learn about your character and the things that have happened in his life, they appear disconnected, but they connect together in fairly logical ways as the game goes on, and that's kind of really satisfying. So and that's part of the detective story they're trying to build, all these disparate things, and there's links, and they come together, and you go, aha, yes, that's how that's connected, and that's a lot of fun. But it's not perfect. There are some, I think, issues. Now, maybe this is why I regret doing this when I have like maybe the last hour or two of the game left, because maybe that would clarify some of the issues I have with the story. But there is, I'll just say there's something about the way 89 is being researched that you discover that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And if I do a spoiler review later, I can talk about it. Maybe I can do that as exclusive content on my new locals page, which I just made, by the way. But in any event, I think there are some issues, which, by the way, if you love detective fiction, and I love detective fiction, I love watching old Columbo reruns in the Poirot series on the BBC and things like that. I love that stuff. It's really hard to make a good detective story without little holes in the plot. It's actually very, very challenging. So I don't fault them too much that there are some things that go, doesn't make sense. But there are, and you'll probably notice them. So the story's not perfect, but I do think it's good. I like the characters. I like the character growth. There's definitely some characters, and Yakuza loves to do this, where they look like they're villains, and then they turn out to be okay, and vice versa. I love that. Story's good. The other thing is I love the way side quests are handled, and this is my favorite part of this game. And I don't just mean because I like doing side quests in video games, but it's because in Yakuza games typically at some point you reach a juncture where you have all the money you need. You have all the yen that you need to have, and you're never really worried about it, like unless you just indiscriminately spend, I guess. But I've never really had to worry about the economy. The economy in this game works great because, at least the way I played it, I'm the type of player that I go to the convenience store, I buy all the health items in the store, and in this game you need medical kits as well, not just food, and those are very expensive. So if you play like me, I never like to go into a big scripted sequence without tons of healing items, so I always have a full inventory. In this game, that means you'll have almost no money at all. And they make light of this in the game. They say he can barely pay rent, he's barely getting by, that sort of thing. So you have to take on the side missions, or else you won't be able to afford healing items and stuff that you need, which I think is good because it's a great motivator. Because side missions in Judgment are not side missions, they are cases. They're side cases. They're literally you doing your job. That's what side missions are. It is Tak Yagami doing his thing as a private eye. And so you go and you help people find people. You do all kinds of, you tail people, surveillance, all kinds of stuff. All the things that you would think a detective kind of does as part of their day-to-day gig, you do, and you get paid for it. And that's how you do side missions in this game. I think it's really cool. It's cool that, like, hey, every time I need more money, I go work the job my character has. I think that feels really cool, and I really enjoyed that. So I would put this in the middle of all the Yakuza games. There's not really a bad Yakuza game. It's a great series. So the ones on the bottom of the list, it's not because I think they're bad. It's just because, these games are awfully compelling. So with Yakuza 0 being the top of the heap, I would put that right up there. And maybe like a Yakuza 4 below that, something like that. And then kind of the ones I would put on the bottom would be maybe like Yakuza Kiwami 2, which is perfectly fine, but just there's really nothing about it that stood out to me as special. I think Judgment is better than Yakuza Kiwami 2, and some of the others I would kind of rate near the bottom, but it's not nearly as good as Yakuza 0, I think. It's right in the middle, and I think if you're a Yakuza fan, you're obviously going to want to play this. If you're new to the series, this is not maybe the one I would say to get. If you're new to the series, get Yakuza 0, and if you love that, then you'll like this. But you really have to be familiar with the series conventions, and Yakuza 0, I think is the best introduction. If you like detective stuff, then you might get this, even if you're not familiar with the Yakuza series. You might get frustrated at some of the limitations of the detective gameplay, but I would say if you like detective games, get it. If you're a Yakuza fan already, get it. Otherwise, there's probably better starting points in this series, but I enjoyed it. I'd put it in the kind of right in the middle of all the Yakuza games. So anyway, that's it for now. Thank you for listening. So stay on the grid and keep well hid.